Hello and welcome back to episode 31 of the Good Grief podcast. Today I'm joined with the lovely Barbara. Also, just a note, we're outside, bit of a change up. It's nice to be amongst the elements, isn't it?
Yeah, lovely.
Barbara, we're having a bit of a different conversation today. And as I've said many times on the podcast, sometimes we associate grief just with bereavement, but of course it comes in lots of different forms. And I feel like that's a nice segue into an introduction to you, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm a forgiveness specialist, which means that I help people to let go of grievances. And often grief and forgiveness are woven together really tightly. And we're often not taught anything about forgiveness or grief, how to do it, how you approach it. And forgiveness can be tricky because there's things that need to be grieved, and grief can be tricky because there are things that need to be forgiven. So part of what I do with people, sometimes one-to-one, sometimes in groups, is help to untangle the mind and the heart.
I love that. Untangle the mind and the heart. That's beautiful. So we obviously had a bit of a chat of what we wanted to talk about today. And I think everyone's probably thinking, well, forgiveness, it's not really something we talk about, is it? Like, or learn or anything like that. So I think it's a really important session. I just want to open it up because you've got this amazing book, which I've been reading, little plug there, Forgiveness Made Easy. And I think it's amazing to kind of frame the conversation as, do you believe in your heart that anyone is capable of forgiveness, even if they've had, something horrendously terrible happen to them? Do you feel you can kind of help them with the tools to get there?
Yes. Yeah, because if you think about any of the most tragic stories that are out there about forgiveness, you're going to be able to find examples of people who have been able to somehow forgive the most heinous things. I mean, really tragic things, murder or the loss of children, all sorts of like really, really challenging things. And there isn't really a correlation between the thing that happened and our ability to forgive it. It seems like there should be, like the really, really bad things, the things that you account as like evil or unacceptable, should somehow not be forgivable.
Yeah.
And we even have language where we talk about things that are unforgivable. And I think what we mean is things that are unacceptable. You don't want to say it's okay for there to be abuse or whatever. You want there to be litigation. You want there to be consequences. We want there to be a way of responding to challenging things that happen. But your ability to forgive is an inner thing. It's much more to do with how you feel about it, and the choice to forgive. I mean, I'll talk about in the book, there are 5 reasons why we don't forgive, and one of them is because we don't really know, well, what does it mean? What is forgiveness in the first place?
Yeah.
And the definition that I use in my book comes from one of my original teachers about forgiveness, and he says that forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. So that means so imagine this is my bag of ill will. So I'm collecting all of this stuff up, and I've got things with me from a long time ago, and this is what I'm holding on to. So the absolute refusal to hold the ill will looks like this.
Yeah.
Looks easy. And why wouldn't you want to let go of this when that you've got all of this ill will, the kind of negative feelings, all the kind of challenge of life? Why do we hold on to it? And that's what I was really interested in my book, was like, how, why is it that we hold on, and how do we actually let it go? And so knowing what forgiveness really means, that the choosing whether or not you hold ill will is not dependent on the thing that happened. Because I can carry this for the whole of my life just because somebody slightly insulted me at a wedding, or I could choose to put it down, and that's my choice. It doesn't depend on whether the other person apologizes. It doesn't depend on any other circumstances other than my choice, which is very empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was one of my questions I was going to ask you, because I think sometimes we associate forgiveness of having to accept an apology and move on. But you've said that you don't have to have an apology to be able to forgive.
Yeah, well, sometimes you don't get one.
Yeah.
Sometimes there isn't even an opportunity, like the person has died, or it's so long ago, or it's dangerous for you to contact that person. So what do you do then? You don't want, and maybe you don't even want an apology. I think what we want really is we want sort of like a balance, and we have like an inner kind of scorecard.
Just a bit of wind, guys. Sorry. sorry, go ahead.
So we have like an inner scorecard
Mm.
about the things that happen, and when somebody does something to us, like they betray us, that it goes out of balance, like the inner scales. And what we really want is to make the scales even. And the way we do that is either by resenting them back. We try and do it. And if you think about it, what the desire for revenge, if you hit me and then I hit you back, you know what it's like to be hit. It's kind of experiential learning. I'm not recommending it, but it's we have this sense of like, I want you to feel the way you made me feel.
Yeah.
And so by doing the thing back, it feels like you've got even. And we even say that, I want to get even.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of the dynamic where we want an even keel. And the way you can choose to do that is you can do that on the inside of you. You don't have to wait for the apology. And even when people do apologize, or even in places where you get restorative justice, when justice is served, still there's that sense of, but that still isn't, that still hasn't done the thing.
Yeah.
So there's more internal work that needs to be done to bring that inner balance. It's like about restoring equilibrium. And in the process that I teach, one of the steps involves things that sometimes need to be reclaimed. So if you feel like someone took something, maybe they actually really did take something from you, like they stole something, or there was a betrayal of trust, you feel like you have to do an exchange to do the righting of the scales.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And so kind of take me back then. I obviously have read your book, and you mentioned about your mum having MS. Is that, well, I guess, what was the pinnacle moment for you in life where you thought, I need to learn forgiveness?
Yeah. Well, I was very lucky. I was doing a personal and spiritual development training weekend. Got quite involved with this particular organization called the Mortal Life Organization, which still exists. And they do absolutely fantastic personal and spiritual development training. And some of it is about forgiveness. And so we were invited to write a list of all the people that we were holding a grievance against. And I thought, probably everyone I ever met. So I wrote my list down, got to number 36, and I thought, yeah, probably my mom as well. I wrote her name down. And then as we were working through that particular issue, I was just like, it's very interesting that I have so much shame around admitting that I was holding resentment against my mom because she was ill. It's like you don't really want to admit that.
Yeah.
And yet I think the truth of it is that we do hold resentments against people for things that aren't even their fault, and that they can't do anything about and can't change.
Yeah.
So that was another place where forgiveness and grief are tied together, but I think forgiveness and shame are woven together as well. And that was my epiphany moment, thinking, I need to forgive her for being ill, because it had such a big impact. Because I was 15 years old when she started to get ill. By the time I was 18, she was in a wheelchair. At 21, I left university to come back to look after her and my brother and my dad.
Yeah.
So it had a really big impact. But my resentment was kind of a way of coping with it. It was a bit like, like having a sort of a shield over my heart, something like that felt I couldn't quite bear the grief of it. And because I was very young, that it felt like holding a resentment somehow was a way of closing my heart down to the situation.
Yeah.
And so I worked on my resentment of her during that weekend training, and then kept forgiveness as a practice for the whole of the rest of my life. So since then, so it was quite a long time ago, more than 30 years ago, I was like, I don't want to carry any ill will in my heart about anything for any reason. And that's my choice. I don't have to. So and it doesn't mean that I'm a complete wuss and you can do anything you like to me. It's like, if you're going to not treat me right, then we won't be friends. But it means that I choose. If I feel like a little bit of something a bit out with somebody, I'll do my work. I'll do a process. And for example, the day that my brother died, I was doing forgiveness work on his wife and his mother-in-law as I drove to the hospital, because I didn't want to carry anything into that room apart from my presence and my love. So so for me, it's a practice that is a practical thing that clears the relational field between me and other people.
Yeah. And so I'm sure a lot of people will maybe kind of question how they might pose a question and say, well, if I forgive someone, I'm not set any boundaries because I've let them get away with it.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, that is the biggest fear, I think, around if I forgive somebody. But the truth is, I can do this and set a boundary, or I can do this and set a boundary.
Mm.
It's like I'm clear about what's acceptable and what's not.
Mm.
It's not contingent, and I think that's our biggest fear around forgiveness, is that we think it's like saying it's okay.
Mm.
It isn't okay, and there's a way of, but when something has happened that isn't okay, either you stay in that stuck state going, that wasn't okay, that wasn't okay, that wasn't okay, that wasn't okay, for decades,
Yeah.
or you do something in, for yourself. It's always about you. And but weirdly, what happens, and I get this a lot when I work one-to-one with people, is we do a process, and it's like I often have people, when I used to work on the retreat, people used to come up to me and say, you'll never guess what. And I'll say, I might do. And they go, my sister, who we've just done the process on, she phoned me or she texted me out of the blue and told me she loved me. Because something happens about the dynamic between two people. When you shift,
Yeah.
it just means that something changes. And although we can't measure it, and we don't know how we do it, like when you're in a relationship with somebody, you feel it. And you know when their heart's a little bit shut and they're a little bit clippy, and they're, it's like we feel it in our energy.
Yeah.
And when you do your work on somebody, it's like it undoes, like like a tug of war. If the other person stops holding that end, then there's no war.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. And so, in terms of forgiveness as a journey and as a step by step, obviously there's a lot of steps in your book and they're very detailed. But if you were to kind of summarize it, what would you say?
Yeah. So the getting to be ready to do your forgiveness work is that sort of the bit that takes the longest time. And it doesn't have to, because you hear stories about people who forgive like instantly. Like even when things started to kick off in Gaza, there were people saying, not in my name, I don't want retaliation in my name. They were willing to forgive even like that kind of heinous crime. So so getting to forgiveness can be a long journey. It doesn't have to be, but first of all, you have to admit that you're holding the resentment in the first place. And most of us don't want to do that. We'd never put it on our dating profile. Hold resentment, never let you off the hook. Like it's not sexy. So takes a while for us to go, actually, no, I really do resent them. And a lot of the time we do this like intellectual, oh, I've forgiven them, but no, we haven't. No, not really. So there's that bit, admitting it first, and then being willing to say, do I want to keep carrying this? And one of my favorite quotes in the book is, and it's an anonymous quote, so I don't know where it came from, but they say, holding a resentment is like setting yourself on fire and hoping the other person will be bothered by the smoke. So it's like we're the fuel that's being burnt up, and the other person is just off living their life. And it doesn't matter how much I hold on to this. I can like hold on to this like really tight, like really, 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 and the other person doesn't know, because they're maybe not even in my life anymore. So it's kind of like a pointless exercise. And there's been loads of studies done about forgiveness, about how it changes your cortisol levels, and it can even help you jump higher, for anybody who's in the Olympics. Literally, they've done studies where if people they measure how high they can jump, they take them to do some forgiveness work, and then they can jump higher, and their perception of hills is they're less steep.
Oh, so I definitely need to forgive them, because I hate hills.
But it has like a physiological effect as well.
Crazy.
It lowers your blood pressure, it lowers your cortisol levels. I mean, it's so knowing kind of like that there are detriments. That's the sort of hidden thing. Like, what's the downside of holding a resentment? Doesn't really seem like it's costing you anything. But just like, years of, drinking too much or eating poorly or whatever, that'll build up over time. I think the same thing happens with resentment. And then when you feel like, okay, I need to do this, then you need a way of doing it. And that's what I've created in my book. So it's a 7-step contained process, a bit like an inner ceremony, where you do it all in your imagination. You're sort of either with somebody guiding you through it, which is what I do when I work one-to-one with people. You can do it on your own, but if it's a big thing, it's better to have someone to guide you, pretty much like anything. Like you can do home practice on yoga, but if you really want to go deep, you get a practitioner to work with you. And so the 7 steps are like as part of this ceremony of forgiveness, where there's things that I've designed that happen that like, if you don't do it, it's harder to forgive. So there's a little bit of like prep at the beginning to look at. So what have I been getting out of holding the resentment? That's often the hidden payoff for holding the resentment. And like I said before, it's a bit like, for my mum's case, this protected my heart.
Mm.
So one of the major reasons we hold resentment is because it protects our hearts.
Yeah.
Another reason is because we get off on being morally, having the high ground.
Yeah.
I like being right. Everyone likes being right. Who doesn't love being right? And then there's also, sometimes we use our resentments as an excuse. So we might go, oh, well, I can always nick the stationery from the office because my boss is an idiot, or justify, well, my partner cheats, so a little something, it's like we use it as a way of justifying our behavior, or staying in a relationship when we shouldn't stay, or there are all these different ways. It's kind of like the inner workings of ourselves. It's mostly unconscious because we don't, like you said, we don't talk about it. It's all happening, like the tip of the iceberg. Underneath here is all of the stuff that goes on that we don't talk about.
And in your life, I mean, you've kind of touched on the health benefits, and the jumping one's crazy. But for you personally, what has the transformation been from when you used to hold resentment to now when you don't?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I still do hold resentment, but I use my little forgiveness list, and I've made little bookmarks. And I have kept a list in the back of my journal for decades. And whenever I feel like, oh, that friend, I hear myself like maybe saying something to another friend about them, and I'm like, put them on your list.
Yeah.
So I put them on my list, and then just do my work. And I think the difference is if I'm going somewhere, like I said, like for my brother's dying, if I'm going somewhere and I know that there's something in the field between me and the other person, I'll do my work before I go. Like if I'm going to meet other members of my family or something, I'll do a little. It's for me, it's just like hygiene. Like you take the bins out of your, every week in different kinds of recycling, but we never do that with our hearts. And I feel like that's what, if we want to really take care of our mental and emotional health, this is a practice that we need to be engaging in as something that we just do. Like, who's on your list this week? Have you done your work? And if you're in a relationship, you do your practice, regularly to keep the field clear. Because I think the thing that builds up between partners is we like the toothpaste tube again. So there's like the little things, and they just kind of build up, and they sort of like it's like not cleaning under the countertop, but you don't do the cleaning of your relational field.
And you said about your brother and having to do that kind of work before you got there. What obviously you don't have to answer, but why did you feel you had to practice that forgiveness before going to see your brother that had passed?
Only because there were a couple of things. So my brother, I was there for the last 4 days of him dying, and so was obviously his wife and his mother-in-law. But there were things that they were doing that didn't, to me, meet my criteria.
Right.
And it's often we want people to be different from the way they are. If they had done more of what I wanted them to do and behaved the way I wanted them to behave, then I wouldn't have needed to do it, which is not true. But so it's just we have expectations of other people, and other people don't always do the things that we want them to do. And it was I just knew that I had been angry, but not in a big anger way, but a quiet kind of, why could they not be more responsive to the needs of my dying brother? And they were doing the best they could, but I was insistent that they did it a different way, and so I just cleared my field on my way.
And so obviously you work with a lot of different people, and there's all different circumstances, and we were saying before, you can't kind of measure it, but I guess what for you in your career, what's been your biggest transformation that you've seen working with someone?
That's a great question. What I love is when the one person does the forgiveness work, and it changes the dynamic between them and the other person. So I worked recently with somebody who her mother gave birth to her when she was 15.
Oh, wow.
So really young mum.
Yeah.
And now this young woman is in her 20s, but her mum now wants to have a relationship with her. She's retrained as a social worker, and she's kind of like taking care of her life in a way that she wasn't when she was a teen. And my client wasn't able to somehow feel connected to her mum in the way she wanted because of all the things that were neglected and not done, through just her mum being a very young mother. And when she wrote to me recently, she just said, I feel differently about her. I want to tell her things that I normally would have just kept quiet to myself. And so that for me is, it's not just you feel like, and it like mentally something shifted, but you feel in your heart like you feel more warm towards somebody or more loving. And I think that's a big deal, to be able to feel differently about someone in a relative. I mean, like, the sessions that I do are usually 90 minutes, and within that time it will change how you feel about somebody, and that's pretty good.
That's
in
amazing.
a short amount of time.
And so let's say you've got a magic wand and you can do whatever you want with forgiveness. Can you see what would the impact be if you did this on like a large scale in your mind?
I would love that. I would love, you know how sometimes you see those massive big Zoom like conferences, like Tony Robbins, and he'll have millions of people all doing their forgiveness work at the same time. Because when I do online Zoom stuff, there's usually about 6 people, if I'm lucky, who come. So it's a really underutilized subject and practice. But my vision is that we could do that globally. And just imagine, like, if everybody did take care of the historical ones. So even like if you're like me and you really lower your bar and you get 36 people, you know, if you work through them like once a week, in a year you would have no resentment. And you would just, it's kind of like, maybe, you know, not quite as good as taking drugs, or, you know, kind of like, you know, like, it's not like the same high, but it's a sustainable kind of like feeling shift where you feel differently about people. And you can then do world leaders or helicopters. I have successfully forgiven helicopters, because where I live, they kind of like do their practice. And I was just driving me insane, because just when I was starting to fall asleep. And I did do my forgiveness practice, and I wrote to the Ministry of Defence saying, could you do something? Of course they won't. But, you know, so I did. It's not just you do the internal work. Sometimes there is something that needs to happen externally. Sometimes you do need to litigate. Sometimes you do need to take people to court. Sometimes you do need to end relationships. It's not about being a wuss or letting people walk all over you. But it changes how you feel about things. I don't think anything else does that.
And we've spoken a lot about forgiving other people. What about yourself? What if you've done something, and does the same kind of practice apply?
Yeah, so really similar. What's slightly different about self-forgiveness, and I do talk about like forgiveness, like, again, more of the kind of deep connections that are very close. So there's forgiving other people who've hurt you. Then there's the need to be forgiven. Sometimes there's things that we need to be forgiven for, and then there's self-forgiveness as well. And often the things we need to be forgiven for and the self-forgiveness are connected. We feel like, I can't forgive myself because I hurt somebody, or I did the wrong thing, or I made a mistake. And that can be very, very challenging. And with self-forgiveness, you also need to, that's why I talk about untangling the mind and the heart. You need to know what's your mind and what's your heart. Because if you're trying to forgive yourself for being a failure, you need to verify, am I actually a failure? You know, is that true? Or, you know, because when, you know, our minds get very tricky, you know, like, I'm the worst person in the world, or I've made the worst mistake, or I'll never recover, you know, like the mind can really, you know, do over who you think you are. And so being able to separate those out. So when I do the forgiveness fields for self-forgiveness, they're longer, they're 2 hours, because we spend a bit of time untangling that part. So really looking at the beliefs that we have about ourselves, like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, really looking at that low self-esteem, kind of those inner beliefs, and then working with those. And then when you get to the forgiveness part, it's slightly different, because it's kind of like a self-acceptance. It's about accepting yourself as you are. You know, no one's perfect, everyone makes mistakes.
There's so many people that come to mind that I think would really, I mean, everyone would benefit from this, but is there someone that you think, I'd love to do a bit of forgiveness work on you? When you were talking about politics earlier, I was like, Donald Trump could really do with a bit of forgiveness work.
He's on my list. And in fact, there's one part of the process that's part of the 7 steps, is this thing called going to the balcony, which is a
I love
William
that.
Ury.
Yeah.
He's a peace negotiator, so he uses this going to the balcony. So when I take Trump up to the balcony, weirdly, and this has never happened to me before working with a client or my own work, he started to vomit. like because when he saw the damage he'd done,
Yeah.
he was so shocked.
And for people who don't know, explain the balcony view.
So
That
there's
was
a
great.
balcony view is when you're trying to work something out on the like the 3D level. If you go to the balcony, and it's a way of looking down, almost like you're looking on a stage, and then you're seeing all the different players, including yourself. You get this higher view. So it's like taking a higher view of the whole situation. So rather than just trying to figure things out from where we are from this point of view, and if you think about video games, you kind of like go up higher, don't you? And then you've got like a different view of what's going on.
So in your mind, you took Trump up there.
I took him up there, and he was sick.
Yeah, I can imagine he probably would be.
Yeah.
Oh my god! So that's so interesting. Like, I guess to kind of, well, before we start to round up the episode, was there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Just one last thing, really, which is that I believe that forgiveness really matters because we're all interconnected. So if we have that experience where if one of my clients forgives somebody and then the other person seems different, I think there is we can't measure it yet, but there's a tangible connection between all of us. And if you believe the kind of deep spiritual teachings, we are one consciousness.
Yeah.
And so it really matters whether or not your consciousness is polluted by a whole load of unprocessed resentment or whether it's not. And did you ever play the game Stuck in the Mud when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Where your hands are like your feet are like that, and then the people who are free run through, and then you get free as well. That's my vision for us doing our forgiveness work. And it's not one and done, as in like a yoga. You don't go, I've done yoga. You've done yoga for that day or that week, but so it's a forgiveness practice. So if we were to do that, we, and I, one of the things I say is like as an invitation to people to do their practice is your forgiveness is an act of amnesty for the whole of humanity. So when every time you forgive somebody, you're making, like you're adding to the field, if you like, of forgiveness, which is like I don't know, if like an energetic, a bit like, like love, or, there's kind of like good feelings, gratitude. They're kind of like, they're sort of higher. And we have so much worry and fear and concern and all the sort of like negative, denser sort of energies. So you're consciously adding to a higher kind of resonance in the world. And if we started doing that, we could be living in a completely different world. If you imagine what it would be like if no one resented anybody, you would really find it hard to justify war.
Absolutely.
And or any kind of like unkindness.
Yeah.
And and I know that's kind of like naive, and I have been called idealistic, which is but it's possible, because from my point of view, back to your original question about do you believe that everybody could forgive everybody? Yes, because it's a choice. And it doesn't mean that we have no rules. You have to have litigation, you have to have consequences. Of course we have those things, but choosing to not hold your ill will, that's just like saying, I'm leaving my heart open for love.
And so, as one kind of final nugget of advice, because you've wrapped that up perfectly, to say to kind of the listeners of this pod, what would be your first step, or what's the first thing they should go and do?
Start your list.
Yeah, I think mine's going to be very long this week.
Well, exactly. If it's 36, you're doing great, because that means you're really listening and really tuning in, and because I think everybody has a starter kit. We used to say, when I used to work on the retreat, we used to say, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. So everyone has parents, so whether they were there or not there, whether they were step or adoptive, it's like, so we all have that, siblings or no siblings, the kids who were mean to you at school when you were little, the people you admired and looked up to, the teachers who you wanted to be, who like you wanted them to like you and they didn't, the ones who were mean, like that's like starter kit. And then first love, first heartbreak, friends who let you down, crappy bosses, politicians. I mean,
so you're writing them all down, and then
you make a decision. Like I'm gonna just kind of carry that around with me, or I'm going to do something about it. So come to a class, or read my book. I mean, in fact, interestingly, at the moment, because I'm going to do a second edition, but you can get a free download in the book that takes me guiding you through the process. Really cool. It's very sort of general, but it works. People do it and get good results.
Make sure I link it below. I always like to finish an episode. Obviously, the podcast is called Good Grief, and I've always tried to learn from my grief and also see the silver linings. You've experienced grief yourself. What have you learned from any experience of grief? It doesn't have to just be, losing your mum, losing your brother. Could be with forgiveness. What's the main kind of lesson that you've learned in a positive?
Well, with grief, I think that you can. Um, it sounds a bit weird, really, but there's a lot of stuff around the outside of regret. Why didn't I say such and such? You know, like in your case, you didn't get the chance to say goodbye.
Yeah.
Things might have been incomplete. So if you can deal with those things through the forgiveness work and that sort of that imaginary process, then you're left with a very pure experience of grief, which is good grief.
Yeah.
It's the missing the person, it's the the love and longing, but there's no, "Oh, I wish I'd done such and such," or there's no the kind of like the regret has gone. So it's just a different quality of grief, which is very beautiful. And it's an everybody has a really unique story. And the other thing really about grief is that often, and I don't know if this is your experience too, but there's like a grief train. So if you're grieving something, the old griefs kind of, the carriages come on and they come with you. And the more you can do your forgiveness work and come to a place of peace about the past, the more free you are to grieve the present griefs. So.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Have you wrapped that up at the end? Thank you so much. That was such a insightful episode, and I'm definitely going to go and write a few people down on my list. Obviously, we've mentioned the book, but I'll make sure I link it below. And then you do your one-to-ones and classes as well, which I can link.
Yes, through my website.
Perfect. So I'll make sure we get those included. And if you enjoyed the episode today, please like and subscribe. Obviously, contact Barbara for any help with forgiveness. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for great questions. Thank you.